Hey, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into my conversation with Cody today. This is going to be an incredible conversation. He's a dear friend of mine. We're talking all about having grown up in the American church and the American Christian society and culture and the effects that that had on us. And we're talking about coming sort of through a season of maturing and growing that the Lord brought us through, and our eyes were open, and we encountered some what we believe to be powerful revelation as to damaging effects that we underwent in our time coming up, where we had values and priorities misplaced and the effects that that caused on us. And our whole conversation is set to encourage church leaders to think about these values and priorities, but also to encourage the next generation of leaders coming up behind us not to make the same mistakes that we did. And hopefully, you can start your ministry off with great values and great priorities that will cause you and cause the people that you are touching and ministering to be extremely healthy and extremely fruitful. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Let's dive into it. Cody and I met through just he and his wife have an amazing story, how they met and what God did. We may touch on some of that today, but my wife filmed and created a documentary for their wedding, and so we were invited to that and met through that, and like there was just a God connection from there. And just stayed in touch and have cultivated a great friendship, and I'm excited because I've wanted to chat with you and just kind of get our conversation recorded. For those of you guys in the Discord community, Cody is a part of Emmaus Online. He's in and around the community there, and so a lot of this now you'll have a face and a story to a little handle and a little, I don't know. Do you have a real picture or like an anime picture on there?
I think I might have a real picture on
Okay,
there.
so you'll have a
Yeah, I'm
face and a
all about
story.
profile pics.
I gotcha. So you
Yeah.
guys, Cody's, yeah. So I'm excited to be able to kind of talk and share this story and just see what God does and says through all of this. So why don't we do this? Let you share a little bit about your background and your story, and we'll just dive into it because I know when we chat, it just kind of organically goes into some really neat stuff. So yeah, who are you? Where'd you come from? Share a little bit of your heart and your background.
Oh man, yeah. Well, I am a pretty normal, obnoxious guy, I guess you could say. I am from the St. Louis, Missouri area, Missouri native, and currently living in Florida for the past almost 3 years now, as we said. Living here with my beautiful wife Ashley and my two boys Daxton and Uriah. They definitely keep us on our toes, that's for sure. There is never a dull moment at this house, never a quiet moment either until they go to sleep. So, man, we wouldn't want it any other way. That's for sure. So, yeah, just to beyond that, just to give a little bit of a background on who I am. I've been born and raised in the church. I've been in it ever since. I'm the grandson of a Southern Baptist pastor. Um, I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church for the first 13-ish years of my life, and then my mom and my stepdad ended up taking the plunge, and we started going to a Pentecostal church. So I've seen two completely different ends of the spectrum for sure, and that's where I did a lot of my I guess I don't know how to I don't know what to call it. I guess where I did a lot of my learning and growing in faith and all of that through my teenage years and early 20s in a Pentecostal church. So I guess in a way I was considered a Baptist-costal is what they always called it. So, but yeah, now I'm just a follower of Jesus and learning how to do that. So yeah, for sure. So I've had over 10 years of experience in ministry. A lot of it has been geared towards youth. We had I had a ministry where we actually traveled to different churches and did youth conferences and all that kind of fun stuff for a few years. Had a lot of fun with it. Really good times. And yeah, so now here I am, and God has definitely done a lot. And like you said, maybe we can get more into it as we go along. But a lot of redemption has happened in my life. And here I am, really just learning how to be a father and a husband. And beyond that, just learning how to be a son of the King. So yeah, I think that about sums me up for sure. So
I love it, dude.
yeah, man.
And you, yeah. So I want to talk a bit today. I definitely want to, if we hit on your story in marriage and different things the Lord taught you there, great. If that comes organically and naturally. If not, it's okay, because I'd love to maybe have you and Ashley on, maybe with me and Kara, and talk through that, because that's just so cool.
That'd be cool.
But today, let's kind of zero in on something you and I think, have walked through. Man, we have a very similar stories, similar experiences. Um, and that's in regards to the American church, Western church, the um, the culture, the priorities, just the values, a whole list of things that we encountered growing up, and the effects of that, where we are today, what the Lord did to kind of bring us to where we are today. So let's go down that road and talk about that. What's your story and background and experiences?
Yeah, I think before I say anything, I guess in a way maybe a little disclaimer of where my heart is at with this. Definitely been through a lot with just learning about the Western Church and seeing it for what it is. Learning about the things that I've been through in regards to the church over the years. But where my heart is at is whatever is being said beyond this point or not. Um, my heart is definitely not to attack the church. That's something I've wrestled with over the past few years with kind of having a disdain or a disappointment in the church and all that crazy stuff. But I really do love the church because I mean, at the end of the day, it's the bride of Christ, and I love it. I'm hopeful for it. Um, there's just a part of me that's really disappointed and discouraged with what it has become. And
And
so,
this isn't a
yeah,
blanket statement. We're not generalizing
absolutely,
here. So there's some
absolutely,
very, very incredibly healthy local churches and different communities and
yeah,
bodies, right?
yeah,
I want to be clear. We're speaking from what it seems like the umbrella, the 10,000 foot umbrella hovering over an American
yeah,
Christianity would be. So this is definitely not a blanket statement. We're both a part of local church communities who are extremely healthy, and so they're out there very much so. But this is maybe to draw a light on a bigger scope of Christianity. Just for
absolutely,
clarity, would you agree with that?
absolutely,
Okay.
100%, definitely, definitely. Yeah, so I guess just leading into that, this really It's really started a few years ago. Well, I guess more than a few years ago. This is before I met my wife. At this point, I was I moved to Kansas City for a couple years to get some healing and restoration and all that stuff. And ended up going back to my hometown around St. Louis, and I I went back. I just kind of casually, just falling back into my grandpa's church. Just started going there, just for the heck of it, just because it was just one of those things of like I had to go to church on Sunday kind of thing, and went there for a while, and really where this whole thing started was just one particular Sunday. I was just sitting in the pew of the back of the church and just listening to the music and everything going on, and just, I mean, the kind of layout and the structure of what we've seen on a Sunday morning service. Um, the question just came out of nowhere of how did we get here? How did we get to this of what we call having church? Like, what is this all about? And is this how it's always been in some kind of worship service? Like, how did we get to the point of we do a few songs, we take up an offering, we hear the pastor preach for about 30 to 45 minutes, we say a prayer, and we go home, and we don't really talk to anybody that we were just sitting at church with or anything like that until the next week, and we act like they're our
Don't forget the
closest.
announcements, man. Church
Oh
announcements.
yeah,
Don't
can't
forget
forget
that.
the announcements. We gotta have the announcements of what's coming up. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Next
for sure.
steps, the blue
How dare
card,
I forget?
VIP.
Yeah, yeah. You can't forget any of that for sure. Yeah, you can't forget any of that. Those are important. Yeah. Um, so yeah, it was just kind of that question and that wondering, that just, like I said, came out of nowhere as I was
Mhm.
sitting in that pew, and man, that was the beginning of an insane rabbit trail for sure, rabbit hole, really. Like, that's kind of what it felt like, and honestly, like, the question scared me, and I started thinking, like, man, what's wrong with me? Like, am I even a lover of Jesus anymore? Like, have I
Hmm.
lost my Christianity? Like, how dare I ask this kind of question? And yeah, and so, man, because I mean, up to that point, like, it's just always been in me as, like, I loved doing that Sunday stuff. I've always been involved in doing that Sunday service kind of stuff. And so, yeah, needless to say, it kind of shook me a little bit, but that really started taking off into really where I'm at today. So I don't know where you kind of want to go from that, but that's kind of where it started for me.
Yeah, so we've talked about from this this like thought process, right? That you just kind of said you had, where you sit down and you question, where how did we get here,
Yeah.
right? How do we get here? How did we get to the place where this is what the culmination of what church is about and looks like?
Hmm.
And is it effective? Like, is it doing everything that Jesus died for the church to do?
Mm.
Right? And I think if we can get our brain beyond the fact that the church is a building, like the local church is not the church talked about in scripture, by the way. Okay.
Yeah.
So, like, I wish people could disconnect them. I know so many pastors that think of their local church like the upper room, right? And they're
Hmm.
like, they'll literally equivalate, if that's even a word. They'll basically use phrases like, so people that don't go to church, meaning a local church, the Sunday system, are equivalent to the people that saw Jesus ascend and didn't go to the upper room and wait on him, as
Yeah.
though, like their local church is the upper room, or the local church is, the organization, the entity, the system is the ecclesia, and it's just not. It's not at all. So, and if it is, it's failing at doing what Jesus had died for and hoped for the ecclesia to do, which was make disciples, right? And it was interesting. I want to go down this train because that question kind of tips off a thought process that should hopefully lead us not against a local church, not against any of that, but back to scripture, back to the values, priorities, and reevaluate our our priorities, are where our money's going, our time and energy, our systems, all of that to accomplish something. So you've talked about we were hyper focused on this leadership stuff,
Hmm.
right? and how that kind of is now morphing into discipleship. So let's talk about that for a minute. Like the culture we grew up in, I grew up in, I don't know, I'd assume you're probably pretty close to this as well. We grew up in a very hyper leadership culture, but not a whole lot of attention was given to the idea of biblical discipleship, what that means, looks like, how it's accomplished, how we measure it, any of that. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, man. I just started thinking about like throughout my teenage years and early 20s, but particularly within my teenage years, because I technically accepted the call into full-time vocational ministry when I was 16 at a church camp that I went to, um, and from that point on, that's kind of where things took off. And throughout basically my whole teenage years, from 16 to 19, really, um, a lot of it was like you said, hyper focused on leadership and what a good leader not just says or does or acts, but how a good charismatic leader looks. And there's just a certain image of the overall, um, I guess, organization that I grew up in. A lot of it was focused on that. And looking back now, during those couple years when things really started to shift for me, I started to look back and think on how I was raised and equipped, I guess you could say, as a leader. I looked back and I started to realize that throughout those at least 3 years of being taught and equipped to be a leader, literally the only time that the word discipleship or any kind of lesson on discipleship was only mentioned once in those 3 years. And it was maybe like a 20 to 25 minute talk that just kind of brushed over things and never really described what discipleship is. It was more of like, we need to make disciples. How do you make disciples? What is discipleship? Like, we were just left with a lot of questions more than answers or general direction. Like, so yeah, I looked back and I started to think, like, it was almost like I felt like I've been robbed in a way of knowing what it's like, not just to be a true, genuine leader, but more importantly, to know how to follow Jesus. And it really hit me hard, because here I am, like, at the time I was 28, 29 years old, and all of a sudden, I asked myself, what is discipleship really? Like, I don't know if I can really define discipleship or really think about like what that looks like. Um, and I've been in the church since before I was born. Like,
Mhm.
what's that all about? And like I said, I felt like I've been robbed. Um and for me, it kind of answered that question of like, what is, at least the churches that I've experienced, like, what is it missing? And for me, like, that's kind of what it came down to, is at least the Western church, um the culture of it's really missing out on discipleship, a true discipleship. Because I think, honestly, like, the heart message of discipleship, or the heartbeat really of discipleship, is really centered around sacrifice and self-denial, and taking up your cross and following him daily. And that's not a sexy message today.
Mm.
It's more of like, follow Jesus and you can get whatever you want. Like, I mean, that's what the culture has really painted in a way of like, I don't know, like, you see pastors that are dressed in expensive clothing, and you see these big shows going on, like showcases of lights and smoke and mirrors, and and just like living a quote unquote good life, for Jesus, and it paints that picture of like, if you follow Jesus, you can have all of this.
Mm.
And they're doing it in the name of the Jesus that was slain, that was murdered on a cross, and so I just think that's an interesting thing for me. So I think really like what it's come down to for me is there, at least what I've experienced, like we've mentioned, like there's been a hyper focus on leadership, and learning how to be a follower of Jesus has kind of taken a back seat or forgotten about
Mm.
completely in some churches, sadly. So yeah.
Yeah, man, you said several good things that I wanted to affirm and kind of touch on. Um, One is the idea of you mentioned the lights and all of the things that churches do and fancy clothes, blah blah blah. One thing that I think is important is those things, obviously, in and of themselves. I don't think anyone has an issue with the
Mhm.
lights and nice clothes and all the things, right?
Yeah.
I think the problem is that we actually like we desire them,
Yes.
and it's like if church doesn't have them, no one's showing up.
Right.
If church doesn't, and not no one, I'm obviously this isn't a blanket statement, right? Like there's a people
Yeah.
out there whose hearts are hungry for one thing, right?
Absolutely.
But it's just interesting that if we didn't desire the lights, what would church look like? If we
Mm.
didn't care about the clothes, if we weren't such a materialistic people, what would
Yeah.
church look like?
Mm.
Um, and so the issue isn't with the lights themselves or the clothes themselves. It's the fact that one, you value and prioritize them enough to designate X amount of your budget that could be going to help people to them.
Right.
Fine, but then you wrestle with which is more important to make your church look cool and have comfortable environments and all of these things. You could come up with them. People are smart. You can come up with a myriad of excuses,
Yeah.
right? But at the end of the day, I think if we're honest in our hearts, the real issue is that we desire them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because we've improperly placed them as priorities and values on the pole of what should be important and what we should desire, I think that's the
Yeah.
real crisis, is a
Yeah.
desire for the wrong things.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting because we do talk about leadership a lot, and um, it seems like when I'm listening to, or when I was, inundated with the leadership stuff, I was listening and I was picking up on two things that really began for me to kind of like cause me to rethink the leadership narrative. One is this is manipulation, right? It's just a really great verbiage that makes you feel justified in manipulating and moving people in your organization. Leadership seemed to be all about creating a culture you wanted to create so people would engage and have energy and all of this stuff, and it wasn't a boring culture or whatever. Or it was to move and lead people to do what you would have them do in leadership capacities or whatever. It's funny, I was listening to some discipleship podcast months ago. Well, the title was something about discipleship, so I was like, all right, I'll give it a look, and it started off well, but the way you discipled, according to those in this podcast, was by getting them to serve in your church, right? Like, and that was a form of discipleship. Serve, people have their gifts in sound or greeting or whatever, and they need to be serving. And that went hand in hand with discipleship. And I was taken back because I'm like, it is manipulation.
Yeah.
Like, if discipleship is about getting people to serve your ministry or mission, Jesus failed
Mm-hmm.
because more people turned away from Jesus than stuck with him and served
Yeah.
his ministry and disciple and whatnot. And he didn't have an organization, but you get what I'm saying. And yet we've in the Christian world have made leadership about this, right? Where it's more about manipulating people, not so that they're better leaders in their home and their marriage, right? And their with their children or in their workplace or greater society. It's so we can get people to lead well in our pipelines and inundate our youth and next gen so that we can hire them at some point and just keep the pipeline going. There's all these underlying motives,
Yeah.
right? That don't ever really get brought to light. But I think for me, it's the idea of leadership because of those things started having me question. And then I went to, okay, well, what was the priority for Christ and the first century apostles those that walked with him? And it was discipleship. And I'm much like you. I was like, well, we sat around. I remember years ago we sat around a staff table and we asked, what's the difference between leadership and discipleship?
Mm.
How do you distinguish the two? Like if we were going to write down a definition on paper, what are the difference? What are the nuances? And today I can see, they're quite different depending on who's defining the leadership, right? Yeah. But it was interesting because I had grown up in my father's church. It's where I worked for many years before I branched out. And I grew up there. And my father had left a church to plant this church. And he had spent time in the denominational system. I was really too young to really know what was going on in those worlds. So my dad planted this church. And because of what he had experienced, he planted a really healthy church that it was never big, never like in terms of the world standards, huge, just a good, decent, medium-sized church or whatever. But values, priorities, the way staff operated, the staff were treated, like the staff health, like finances, all of this stuff, I felt like, man, this is really great. The values and the priorities are in place, right? Like I felt like the staff for the most part was stewarded really well in terms of health and work culture and all of this stuff. And it's like we're just kingdom mindset. Like it was never about building the church. It was never about having enough volunteers, right? Like we never abused people for the sake of having someone fill a spot, right? It was just a healthy way of operating. So I never knew anything different. And then I started getting calls just after college from mega churches around the country, some of the biggest names. And I was like, let's do this, right? And because in my mind, I'm like, everyone operates this way. This is the church. This is kingdom. Right? Like it just makes sense. And it wasn't until then that my eyes were open to no. Most people don't operate that way. And I for the first time was slapped in the face with what I would say is the vast majority of church culture, especially as you get into the larger church, the corporate church, size. And, and that's when the Lord began to really cause me to rethink things. And I went down this trail. And so it's just interesting to hear you talk because I can't help but wonder, you and I are both about the same age. I think you might be a little older than me by a couple years. And how many other guys and ladies in our generation are thinking the same or feeling the same thing, but maybe don't have words to articulate.
Yeah.
Right. And so what ends up happening is there's an exodus or a divorce from the church, local church culture. Mm-hmm. Which isn't the right answer, right? Like deconstruction and divorce, it's not the right answer. But because there's just a repulse, like I'm just repulsed by something in the air, and there's not really words to articulate. So what I think is happening is like, because there's not language, there's just this thing in the air, right? There's a divorce happening from the church, and people are just turning like, local church this, the church that, and that's not the right answer. I really do believe the hope of our societies and communities is in the local church. My Absolutely. Thing has just been, let's get priorities and values in line. I feel like greed and the desire to climb the ladder and to build a platform and to have all these things has infiltrated the leadership of churches, which has caused a lot of these side things. But because of this, what unhealthy dreams do you think the church kind of gave us and is giving others like us that are in their college years, those that feel a call to ministry. Um, yeah, what do you think the effects of that are based off of your story?
Yeah, well, to first touch on like what you were just talking about with basically just to learning how to follow and people basically being um, thrown into leadership positions. It reminded me of a couple people that I know personally that I've seen over the years that have had these moments where they've had an encounter with the Lord. Um, Jesus has clearly called them to Himself. Um, they lay it all out there for Him, and then it's just like weeks later they're in some kind of leadership position within a church, whether it's like something as simple as like a door greeter or like just anything like or going up and giving the announcements when just weeks or months later they gave their life to Jesus, and like that I've seen people, I know people personally that have been through this. And like I've seen them before, like when like just looking at them I'm just like, oh my gosh, they have so much to offer to to the ministry,
Mm-hmm.
wherever I was at, like that's where my mind was at as well, is like, oh man, you're capable of doing so much. And oh my gosh, if somebody came to Jesus and they knew how to play an instrument, oh man, like I remember being
Hunting them
so stoked
down,
about it. I'm just like,
stalking them.
oh, this is a gift from the Lord,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
before you know it, they'd be right up there on stage, yeah, and they'd be doing their thing. And now some of these people, like, they've either like totally deconstructed their way to deconversion, and they've have some kind of belief in the Lord, but they don't want to have anything to do with the church. You hear that a lot, and I really think it's a result of what we've missed as the church and as leaders of the overall church body. Like, we've been obsessed with throwing people into that overall mission of a local church, like you said, and man, it's wrecked people, and like, because of the fact that we don't meet somebody where they're at when they've had an encounter with Jesus, and we're like, okay, let's walk together, let's walk through this,
Mm-hmm.
let's find out what it looks like for you, particularly what it looks like for your life to be laid down at the feet of Jesus, and what it looks like for you to follow Him, learning obedience to Him. What does that look like? Teaching
Mm-hmm.
them the things that we all need to know when it comes to living life and following Jesus. So, um, and another thing that came to mind was we really see this with Jesus calling His disciples. Like, when did these disciples, who obviously ended up turning into the apostles, like, when did they really start their apostleship, so to speak? It was after they followed Jesus. It was after they sat and learned from Jesus, when they heard His teachings. Like, they spent this whole time. I mean, obviously Jesus' ministry was 3 years, so they spent 3 years knowing and learning the ways of Jesus, practicing the ways of Jesus before they even were handed the gift of the Holy Spirit, and they went out and started basically their own ministries. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we definitely need to learn how to follow before we lead, for sure. So yeah, with that being said, like what you were talking about with like the unhealthy dreams and everything that has been fed to us, like, at least just from my personal experience, that's really the best thing that I can speak from. But um, things that I remember, like, going through, to this day, it's still stuff that I'm getting worked out of being rewired on how I see things, and what the Lord has called me to. But one of the biggest things that was really, like, whether it was intentional or not, but basically being shown to me, when learning how to be a leader. Um, Really, a lot of it was centered around the pursuit of what I call Christian celebritism, and the pursuit of being a Christian celebrity, so to speak. Because I think like you said, we're a couple years apart, but I think we kind of grew up in that same kind of era. And at least what I've seen and what I remember is like really this whole mega church culture and this Christian celebrity thing really started to take its rise in the 2010s, and um, man, and the more that I started like consuming things from like pastors of mega churches and everything like outside of the church that I was at, I just started to see the whole culture that was painted, and it was just like, like one of those things where your eyes are wide open. You almost see the reflection of everything in your eyes, and you're just like, oh, this looks amazing. Like I want this, like I want to be, I want to be that preacher that wears the tattered jeans and the slick hair and the leather jacket, like I long to be that. And, yeah. And so like, it was kind of like instilled to, like that is the high calling to be a Christian celebrity.
Mm.
Um, and like I just remember hearing like scripture references, like or just like these charismatic words of like ask God to expand your territory, and I want to be famous so that God can be made famous and all of that. And man, it was such a shallow thing and a twisting of scripture, like. And so I definitely I latched onto all of that, and I was really just taking God's word to like submitting it to my dreams and what I've been like what I want to pursue, instead of pursue or like taking my dreams and submitting them to God's word and submitting them to who He is. So yeah, like I said, the pursuit of Christian celebrityism and kind of like under the umbrella of that is like another thing that I mean, like I said, 16 years old, I accepted the call into full-time vocational ministry at a church camp, and immediately the first thing that came to mind was I'm going to be a full-time youth pastor. So I started like exploring other youth pastors just within our organization as a whole, and youth pastors on YouTube or whatever, and just seeing some of their stuff and how they look, how they're dressed, and like just even the tone of their voice and the charisma that comes from them. Just learning from all of it, and it was all in my pursuit of I want to be that cool youth pastor. Or like I've been involved in music ministry for, I mean, really since I was 10 years old. Um, it was also in my mind is like I want to be one of those worship leaders that everybody is just like, oh my god, this guy is amazing. Like he's so cool, I want to be him. Like, so it was just one of those things. And really, like, I think I don't know, like underneath all of it, like I think, to put it simply, it was a pursuit of a platform, and that's all I had in mind. Is like I just want a platform. I always wanted to just travel to different churches and do the kinds of things that I mean, thankfully I got to end up doing for a while. That was my sole pursuit, even to the point to where like the full-time 9 to 5 jobs that I had, I saw it as just a stepping stone. I saw it as something I just had to do right now so I could pay the bills and put gas in the tank, or even just to have finances to shuffle into the ministry and the dream and all of that. That's all it was. Like I totally looked past so many 9 to 5 jobs that I had without realizing, looking back now, that God actually had me there for a particular reason. And I don't know, man. And it was all because like all I wanted was a platform to influence people on, for people to be blessed by the gifting and the talents that I've been given. And like that's all I thought about. That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted to do, to the point to where it was just like I'm either touring or doing some kind of full-time ministry with a mic in my hand, or I am wasting my life. I was convinced of it. And honestly, like, thank God for my wife. That was one of the things where we were still dating at this moment. And I remember telling her, I considered myself a frustrated minister because, like, I had this desire, I had the gifting, I had the talents to do something like this, but I had lack of opportunity. Like, nothing was happening, and I was so frustrated, just beating my head up against a wall. Like, why is nothing happening for me? Is it over for me? I remember talking to my wife again while we were dating at the time, and I remember telling her straight up. I said, until I am touring, whether it's doing conferences again or whether I am like doing music or whatever, until I'm touring, I am convinced that I am not living out my calling. And like, that's the only way I will know that I am living out my calling, when I am active in music or speaking. And all my wife said was, "Do you really believe that?" And I was like, of course I believe that. Like, why would you even question that? And um, it wasn't until after we got off the phone, like, I laid there in bed and was just staring at the ceiling, and I was like, oh, she might be onto something. And that's really like kind of what helped. Honestly, I think that was kind of the start of things being rewired within me, and priorities being reorganized. Because little did I know at that time that um, God was God was like working on and getting ready to redeem a whole bunch of things for me, but he was getting ready to lead me into a lot of things that um, I didn't know that was actually necessary of what he's wanting to do in my life, I guess you could say. I remember telling you and Kara this when we were doing like the interview kind of thing, like after the wedding and all of that. I remember talking about how God, like the two things that I desired the most was ministry and marriage. And just a little insight of my story. Like, I've been through a marriage before, so has Ashley. We've both come out of broken marriages, and um, I was convinced that I blew it on all things. I took marriage into my own hands because I desired it, and the desire consumed me. I took it, and it wrecked me. And long story short, God redeemed marriage to me. He restored marriage to me, and I was so grateful for it. And I remember, I don't know if I said this point blank or if it was just something that was in my mind, but I was in this mindset of, I'm just still waiting on God to restore marriage to me. Or ministry, sorry. I'm waiting for God to restore ministry to me. Thank God he's given me marriage back. I'm still waiting for the ministry to be given back. And here I am now, and I'm starting to realize that he actually restored both things back to me. He redeemed both things back to me, packaged up into one. Because my oldest is actually my stepson. And not only was going into a situation where I'm learning to be a husband again. For the first time in my life, I'm learning to be a father. And man, and I mean, even today where I'm at now, like, there's still moments where the Lord is showing me, your family is your ministry right now. And I don't know, man. I'm starting to realize like what's important in life for me, and some of the things that was instilled to me when I was learning to be a leader and equipped as a leader. And the pursuits that I had was so shallow. It was just so shallow, and honestly so selfish. Um, I think there was a genuine intent. Like, the whole time I've always just wanted people to be blessed by whatever the Lord's given me. I love bringing people into his presence. I love people encountering his presence. I love ushering in God's presence. That's always been a genuine desire. But the flesh part of me was always pursuing that what I called the Christian celebritism. And if I didn't get to that point, then I was missing it. And so I think for me, those were kind of the dreams, the unhealthy dreams, so to speak, that was given to me, so to speak, in my teenage years, for sure.
Yeah, man, that's so good. It's so common, I think. I was actually just talking to someone a couple days ago, and we were in this conversation about wealth, but I think it applies here as well to something you said a minute ago, and I'll touch on it. The conversation was there's a group of pastors, and like there's a section of Christianity today that is like they pursue wealth for the kingdom, right? And that's the language they'll use. It's like, I want to be wealthy, take back the Christians should be taking back the wealth and using it for kingdom and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And there's this issue with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that they're in your heart, you desire wealth.
Yeah.
That's an issue. Like, the love of evil, or the love of money, is the root of all evil. And it's like, we blanket, we justify, we don't ever take the time to be introspective and examine, do I desire wealth? Can I just let it go? Can I just be okay with an average home, average car, average clothes, average bank account, average retirement? Can I just live content with godliness and whatever he puts in front of me? The answer, I think, is no, for a lot of people. And the issue is not that, like, what people have wealth, right? Yeah. Hopefully they're using that for kingdom and storing up for themselves where neither moth or rust destroy, right? But the issue is when there's a pursuit of wealth and we say it's for the kingdom, right? Because the issue is that we actually desire wealth. And we're just justifying that desire by saying, oh, but we'll use it for the kingdom. There's still an issue in the heart which desires something, namely wealth in this case. But it can also apply to desiring the platform, desiring fame. I'm going to be famous and I want a platform to glorify Jesus. Great. But the problem is you want a platform. The problem is you want fame. That's got to die.
Yeah.
Like, the problem is you want wealth. That's got to die. And it's one of these things where we've literally got to get our heart posture to a place where, like, I'm just so content with godliness and what I have.
Yeah.
For you named it. And my wife and I, we are so heavy on the idea of revival starts with family. Like, ministry starts at home. That is the greatest ministry. The highest honor is to literally raise the next generation if you have children, and steward your wife if you're a husband, serve your family if you're a wife, whatever it is. Family is so undervalued in our culture and overlooked.
Absolutely.
But getting content, as Paul tells Timothy, godliness and contentment is great gain. And he's literally talking about, don't worry about how much you have. Like, if you got food in your stomach to where you've got some sense of nourishment, you've got clothes on your back, you've got a roof over your head, you've got what you need, be content with that and desire godliness, godly character, right? Fruit of the Spirit from your life. That is great gain. And not wealth so you can use it for the kingdom, not a platform so you can glorify Jesus to millions of people and show everybody what a great example you are, what wisdom you have, or, all of this stuff. The problem is we desire these things and we cloak it so that it appears good. But if we took back and we're honest with our hearts, we desire the wrong things.
Absolutely.
And I think that for me, that's the culmination of what I'm not like, I have no frustration or hurt or anything against any type of leader or church. For me,
Yeah.
my agenda is like to shake the next generation and say, don't walk the
Absolutely.
same path I walked. Don't desire the same things I desired, because I wasted years of my life. I hurt a lot of people, and
Yeah.
even my wife and children have suffered because of my stupid desires, where I was chasing to climb a ladder, where I was chasing to rub shoulders with this church or this name or that name, where I was chasing to have wealth and I just said I want to use it for the kingdom, where I was chasing a platform so I could influence all these people for Jesus. And at the end of the day, if the Lord's called me to something and I'm chasing him, I'm going to fulfill that calling in my life.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
like the if you feel like you have to position yourself in a place to walk in your calling, you are slapping God in the face with distrust.
Yep. Yep.
As though you make your calling in life and purpose in life come to fruition.
Yeah.
Like, if we would teach the next generation, just get at the feet of Jesus, study what he preaches and teaches, be in his presence, find healing and wholeness, get healthy mentally, emotionally, spiritually, be content with godliness and what's put in front of you. Don't chase wealth. Don't chase a nest egg. Don't chase a higher income. Don't chase these things. Get close to
Yeah.
Jesus. Let him put desires in your heart. Then chase those desires, because he's going
Yeah.
to put opportunities in front of you. Don't try to bust down doors or make things happen. Chase
Yeah.
Jesus. And like I heard Michael Koulianos on some little short or something say, like, if you're just touching the hem of his garment and you're just focused on staying at his feet, like, you're going to be in the right position at the right time. And it's so true,
Absolutely.
but we don't really teach that to the generation of Christian leaders coming up. And so, yeah, everything you said is just so good, and I think it's just, my heart um, is to, if pastors and leaders and different things are listening to this, is really just to say, hey, like, let's be honest with our heart's desires. What are they?
Yeah.
Like, and let's
Yeah.
realign them to what Scripture says we should desire.
Mhm.
Like,
And
what are we prior? Say that again.
yeah, it reminded me that not too long ago, I heard something that a pastor in Denver said. He was talking about sacrifice and provision and all of that, and something that he said really caught me. He said, God will never ask you to sacrifice something that he hasn't given you. So those desires that are in our heart, it's something that God has given us. And those are the things that he's going to ask us to lay down, because of the fact that those desires can consume us, and it will cause us to leave wreckage with everything that matters the most, so a couple weeks ago, for example, um, I was having another moment where I was dealing with so much frustration. I'm like, man, I just want to be used. I just, honestly, deep down, I just want to get back on a platform. And my wife was sitting there talking to me and trying to encourage me and everything. She was kind of hurting for me as well. And um, I, all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, um, it seemed like God really was cultivating this moment where he was asking me to lay this desire down for opportunity to be used, so to speak. Um, all I heard was, if you were to lay down the pursuit of public ministry, and you were to do that, to at least for the next 15 years at least, to do nothing but focus on loving your wife, learning how to be a husband, and raising and discipling your kids, would you be willing to do it? And that was challenging, because I'm just thinking 15 years is a long time. That's a long time for me to not pursue or desire any kind of platform, so to speak. Um, but honestly, like in my spirit, I was just like, I think I would, because honestly, like, this pursuit and this desire is kind of wearing me out. I'm kind of getting tired of desiring this because it's just nothing but disappointment. And so I think I would, and um, but then all of a sudden, like I just started thinking, like, well, 15 years down the road, what if my kids finally they're old enough and they're leaving the house, and me and my wife are able to go pursue public ministry opportunities. What if I die? I'll never get to do it again. And all of a sudden, all I heard was, how are your boys leaving the house? How are they leaving the house knowing that their dad was around, that their dad was attentive to them, that they knew how loved they were by their dad, that they knew the God of the universe, the God that created them and breathed life into them, that they know where they stand with Jesus and their relationship with Him. Do your kids know who they are in Jesus by the time they've left the house? If that's what they've done, if that's what the case is, you've done everything I've wanted you to do. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was, like I said, it was this reminder that I have given you this family for a reason. It's not just to reclaim or um, redeem marriage to you. I have redeemed ministry to you as well. And if you were to pour and invest and approach this family that I've given to you with the same kind of anticipation and excitement and whatever else that you would put towards public ministry opportunities, if you would give that towards your family and invest that into your family, what would your family dynamic be? What would your wife be? What would your kids end up being? What would they know? How would they live? Who would you be if you were to pour this same kind of energy and excitement into this family, this ministry that I've given you? And it makes me think that I think that's the reason why we see like Christian celebrities. We've seen quite a few falls morally, and these people almost losing their families because they've been so distracted and invested into this ministry and building this church and honestly building this brand of their church that they've left their families on the back burners, and that's created so much space for disruption and brokenness to come in and wreak havoc on everything. Something that my counselor told me one day. He said that ministry is a really beautiful thing. It can be a beautiful thing, but if we're not careful, it could actually be a mistress. That we could actually cheat on our wives or our spouses or our kids. We can cheat on them with ministry if we're not careful because it consumes all of us. And honestly, man, I think sadly that's why we've seen a lot of brokenness. I have a couple people in my life that I love dearly that are pastors' kids, and man, they've been shaken because one thing that I've heard from a few of these friends of mine, one thing that I've heard from them that's been constant is, I just wish my dad was around more. I always had to share him with everybody, and I wonder like what God thinks about all of this. Like when we have this family that we're called there's a reason why our wives and our kids or our spouses, our husbands, whoever's listening to this, there's a reason why our spouses and our kids have placed in our lives to be with us basically from the time we wake up to the time that we go to sleep. There's a reason, because honestly, what I'm learning and what I'm seeing is if we want to be made into the image of Christ, there is nobody that is going to help shape us like our spouses and our kids to look more like Christ, to have the patience and the long suffering of Christ and the unconditional love of Jesus. There is nobody that's going to challenge that in us. There's a reason why they've been placed in our lives daily versus the people that are practically strangers that we have encounters with every now and then or once or twice a week or whatever. Like, there is a reason for that. And I think if we have families we need to pay attention to that. We need to pay attention to the fact that these precious people have been placed into our lives from the moment we wake up to the time we go to sleep for a particular reason. And if we have that desire, like just personal, like if we have that desire for like a public ministry or something more, what things that you've brought up, Lee, like the things like with wealth, then because you want to invest into the kingdom of God, or just anything, like the desire in our heart could potentially have, more than likely has been placed in us by God. But there are so many things that our flesh is kind of like grabbing on to that desire, and we're just wanting it for some kind of personal gain. And so those desires, like I said, God never asks us to lay something down that he hasn't already given us. And the reason why it needs to be laid down is because there's things that we've attached to it that does need to die, because it is selfish. It's not godly. He's using that time to basically like just let our flesh fall away so that we can look more like Jesus, you know? And so if anything, like I really do believe that the desire for public ministry, for me, the desire to lead people into his presence, is a godly desire. What he's doing right now, besides just teaching me and really wanting for my wife and kids to know his presence and his love and who he is through me as a husband and a father, he's also teaching me the things that I need to be some kind of minister or leader or whatever you want to call it, in a way that is actually godly, that is selfless, you know? So, yeah, that's
Yeah, I don't think the enemy is going to give you a desire to build the kingdom of God. You know,
absolutely.
so what I think is the fine line comes in is we do have like human desires, fleshly desires that we are supposed to die to, right? And crucify and take up the new nature, right? That comes through the Holy Spirit, Christ. So it's a subtle distinction, but I think it's Psalm 27:4. Don't quote me on that, but draw nigh unto the Lord; He'll give you the desires of your heart. In other words, seek first the kingdom, right? Let the Lord be your only desire, right? Let that be your first top priority, your first desire. And then as you do that, he'll begin to give you the desires of your heart that are his desires for you. At that point, if you've got the he's your one thing part right, then yeah, chase your heart, right? Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. I don't think, and this is just me talking, this isn't like scriptural or anything. I am at a place in life where I don't think God gives the desire for wealth.
Yeah.
I don't think he does. I think he'll give you a desire to be a coffee shop owner. And if that coffee shop multiplies to 53 campuses and you're a millionaire now, then hopefully you have the heart posture that just lives with an open hand and says, I never wanted wealth anyway, let me just build the kingdom. But if you go into the business venture saying, I want wealth so I can use it for the kingdom, I think there's a serious issue with wanting wealth, fame, platform, any of those things, even if you tag on to the end of it, for the kingdom. Yeah. And that's the distinction I want to make in the next generation of leaders rising up is desire ministry, desire public ministry, desire to plant a church, desire to be a missionary, desire to worship, desire to lead, desire to preach, desire to build the kingdom. Yeah. But be very careful when you're desiring things that do nothing but edify you and benefit you, right? Fame, platform, wealth, all these things. And even if you say wealth for this, platform for that. And so, yeah, I just want to be clear on that distinction because I think it's so important that we still have to get I don't want anything but this one thing if I desire, this one thing I will seek to know you, right? Yeah. And I think if we get that right, everything else falls into place. How could it not? We become one of God's most loved and trusted, closest, servants on the earth, right? And so, everything you're saying is just so good, man. And so I want to kind of get to where we're landing the plane here. So very quickly, obviously, these motives and priorities, these values, that seem to be dominating a lot of the Western church. Again, I want to stay away from generalizations. I'll repeat that over and over. Have caused some serious negative side effects: depression, anxiety, faithlessness, feeling the sense of a loss of purpose. Let's touch on that briefly, and then we'll land the plane with one more little question, and then pray us out. But what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I thought about this question as well when you sent it to me, and I kind of described every single one of those things listed in that question, and I touched on each one based off of what I've went through with it, and it's basically like the voices that I hear. That sounds really weird. I hear voices, but the voices and those lies that kind of like creep in and convince me that I'm missing it. We think about the depressed. How has it left this generation depressed? When it comes to the depression that I've dealt with, one of the things that one of those lies that I hear is you haven't achieved those dreams that have been placed on you. Therefore, you've failed and you've disappointed God. So I've missed it, and therefore I'm just like, I'm a piece of junk, man. Like, gosh, why would God ever want to do anything through me ever again? Like, I've missed it, And so then we think about the anxious, the anxiety. The thing that I hear is, don't waste your life for the gifts God gave you. Like, and if you don't use those gifts, God will take them from you. And like that brings so much anxiety, like, and something again that my counselor has told me one time. He's like, don't ever let anybody brainwash you into thinking that God will take your gifts from you if you're truly desiring to just be obedient to Him.
Right.
I have seen certain talents being lifted from somebody. Like, we think of like people that have been a worship leader before or a music minister, for example, and they've lost their voice completely. But it's because that God's wanting to do something further through them. They started speaking or they started writing books and all of this. Like, God is wanting to do something else. And, so not to dive too
Yeah, you're
deep
not
into
being
that.
punished.
Yeah, they're not being punished. They're being advanced into another thing that the Lord's wanting to do through them. So don't ever let anybody brainwash you into thinking that if you're trying to do something other than this dream that has been over you, don't ever let anybody brainwash you into thinking that God's going to take your gifts away from you.
That's good.
So then we think about the faithless of this generation, the faithlessness of this generation. Something I've heard is I've already missed the mark. I screwed up. God is done with me. That's something like when I went through the divorce and all of that. I was convinced that at that point I took marriage into my own hands, completely wrecked the ministry that I honestly always dreamed of up to that point. Like, I saw all of that burn to the ground. And I looked back, and as I was seeing the rubble and when I was seeing the ashes and smoke coming up from everything that's just been consumed, I was convinced, like, God is never going to do anything through me again or do anything for me again because I blew it. I absolutely blew it. And I do not blame Him if He ever wants to have anything to do with me again or through me or for me again, because it's my fault. And so honestly, like, that's something that I've come a long way from that kind of mindset. But man, it really did cause a lot of faithlessness and, like, honestly, like, faith-filled prayers, so to speak. Like, like, all of a sudden, like, after all that happened, it was very challenging for me to pray bold prayers and actually believing that He would actually do something that He promised to do. And so it takes the faith away from me. And honestly, like, on the other end of faithfulness, like, being faithful to somebody, it wrecks that too.
Sure.
Like, I see intimacy going in with that. I mean, intimacy with Jesus. Like, it wrecks that too. So, and then just to think about the lost, like being completely lost, like our generation, like, so, something that I've dealt with, like just feeling lost or like in a fog or something like that. Like I started to think like this whole time I've had no plan B. It's been plan A this whole time. And I am wasting my life if I do not have a mic in my hand. I am not valuable if I do not have a mic in my hand, whether I'm singing or speaking. That is my only plan A. There is no plan B whatsoever. As I get older, I had a few opportunities here and there, to do the things that I dreamed of doing, like I like being a youth pastor or whatever you want to, like all these kinds of things. And I got there, and I'm just like, this isn't what I expected it to be, and um, had those certain opportunities, um, and but still yet, like here I am now, and everything that I had in mind, everything that I dreamed of as a teenager and in my early 20s, none of it has really come to fruition. I have not seen any of it exactly what I thought it was going to be. So now here I am, a married man with two kids. So much has changed in my life, and I don't know what a plan B could be, because it seems like I needed to have a plan B, maybe, like, because I didn't know this plan A was never going to come to fruition. Um, so, with that, is like, okay, well, if I'm not, let's just say I'm not making a living, so to speak, with a mic in my hand, what else am I good for? Like, what do I do now? Like, and so like, and that's something that I've been dealing with, honestly. Like, that's something that I'm currently walking through. It has kind of placed me in a fog of like, I don't know what to do or where to go or what I'm even good for. What am I good at other than like speaking or singing? Like, so I think that's where hopefully that kind of covers with like, at least what I see, how it's left this generation, what depressed, anxious, faithless, geez, and lost. So, yeah, that's just kind of the things that I deal with. So
Yeah,
hopefully I'm
no,
not there.
that's, I think that's so common. I think they're byproducts of a lot of things within our society today, and the things our society tends to value and create, especially the more and more we get inundated with social media culture and things like that, comparison and different things. But here's one thing, one scripture I would say, and then one final concluding topic, and then we'll pray it out here.
Do it.
Ecclesiastes, let's see if I can get it on the screen. Yeah, okay, great. Ecclesiastes 12, we'll start at verse 12, but all the way through the end there. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. Right?
Mm,
And this is so powerful because I think there's this seeking for like, even we talked about like leadership and like, how do I become this, that, and the other thing. And if I don't, there's a sense of purposelessness. If I don't have the wisdom, if I don't have the skill set, the competence, if I don't climb the ladder, this, however we measure or define success. And so we look for it. We look for these sources and these sages and whatever else, like leadership mentors or pastor mentors or whatever, with the wrong motives in mind. We're doing it because we want to achieve something or succeed at something, because our
yeah.
purpose or identity is attached to it. And that's the issue. But verse 13 settles that. The end of the matter, after all has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Okay, the whole duty, your purpose in life is not to build a ministry, not to acquire wealth, not to do any of this stuff. As good as those things are, your purpose in life is to fear God.
Mm-hmm.
Cultivate the heart that fears God. If you don't fear God, you have not fulfilled your purpose in life. You have missed it.
Absolutely.
If you do
Absolutely.
not fear God, you have missed your purpose and calling in life. You can
Yeah.
build a mega ministry, save millions, give millions to the kingdom. You have missed your purpose if you have not learned to fear God. Because
Yeah.
that's the whole duty of man. That's what he puts you on earth to figure out, is how to
Yeah.
fear God and cultivate a heart of love, right?
Yeah.
Why is that so important? Verse 14, God will bring every deed into judgment. Okay, that doesn't scare people too much, especially the people that think they're good. But watch this.
Mhm.
Every secret thing.
Secret thing. Yeah.
Oh, we got to build these businesses and acquire wealth to give it to the kingdom. The secret thing is you actually just desire wealth.
Yeah.
That's going to be brought under judgment. Like the
Yeah.
secret thing of, I got to have a platform and be famous, right? To, preach the gospel, right? You actually just desire a platform and fame and the benefits that come with that. That's going to be brought into judgment. Desire one thing: to know Jesus, to become like Jesus,
Yeah.
to fear God, to learn to love, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all there is to it. And so I just want to encourage anyone listening that you haven't missed your purpose
Hmm.
unless you've not learned to fear God.
Yeah.
Chase after the fear of the Lord. That's what I'm just trumpeting that here on this channel, within communities I'm in. Chase the fear of God and you will not miss the mark. You will find success in this life. The truest, most important sense of success. And so with that, what can we do to kind of just conclude, realign some of our priorities for and really as next generational leaders. As you and I we're on the cuff of breaking into being really where the generation that's gone ahead of us are starting to retire. We're still a little bit out from that, heading in, and then there's a generation behind us in college right now and so on. What can we do? Let's talk about some priorities and values that really should be priorities for us to kind of think about, be intentional about as we move into leadership.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind is really really focusing on your root system. And what I mean by that is a really good friend of mine kind of gave me a I guess science lesson. I don't know what the study of trees and plants is called, but he gave me a lesson on trees. He's very intrigued by trees and how they work, and he told me. Um, he said trees that are standing tall and strong and that stand for so long is because they have a healthy and strong root system. And the crown of the tree, basically the bottom of tree branches, the crown of the tree never outgrows its root system. If that were the case, it basically becomes top heavy and it falls over to its death and it becomes uprooted. So he encouraged me with that one day by telling me you need to focus on your root system. Because if you're, he said, that's the problem with a lot of people today that are pursuing these leadership opportunities or these platforms and this influences. They are pursuing a crown without having a strong root system in place, and that crown can grow because that's really what happens in our culture. Like if you are pursuing something with everything that you've got, there's a good chance that you could do it. Like that you will obtain it. And sometimes the Lord will allow you to get everything that you've ever asked for. We've seen that in Proverbs with Solomon. Solomon had everything that any of us could ever ask for. He had it all, and he said that's nothing. It's rubbish, basically. Like that's nothing. And so just be easy on this pursuit of a crown if you do not have a strong root system in place, because if that crown will outgrow your root system, there will be a time where you can and probably will fall over top heavy, and you could be uprooted because your root systems weren't in place, because they weren't fully grown. um, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Another thing, and I have to credit you with this, Lee. You gave me this book a couple years ago called Anonymous. And man, that book wrecked me. and for those who have never heard of it, first I encourage you to get it. I don't know the author's name. You probably do, but maybe we can link that
I
up in
can't remember
Discord.
it, but
We'll
yeah,
have to
we'll,
look it
we'll,
up.
we'll
I
put a
think it's
link or
it's
something.
behind me somewhere. Yeah, yeah, there it is. Anonymous by
Alicia
Alicia
Britt
Britt
Cole
Cole.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, that book was a game changer for me. She basically talked about the hidden years of Jesus, the stories that actually happened that we have never read, that we have never heard about. There is so much of his life from birth to death that we have no idea what it looks like. And those are very important years because during those years, he was being built up. He was becoming who he was supposed to be during those years, to put it simply. And man, that was a big encouragement to me. And what it did for me was it actually it really got me to a place of actually just embracing these so-called hidden years that I've been in. Man, and just how crucial those hidden years are, and honestly, how precious those hidden years are. Because there's so many times where, like for instance, I had a very, he's a very well accomplished musician, worship leader, worship artist. At the time, he was a worship pastor of a church that I was part of in St. Louis. And I remember telling him, I was sitting in his office and I told him, I was like, man, I wish that I could do some of the things that you've done, like, or doing now. Like, man, you've done so many cool things. Like, that must be amazing. And he looked at me and he's like, honestly, I'm envious of people like you that basically have a normal life, so to speak. And it made me think of that. Like, there will come a time where God could place you in a place where you're in public ministry, so to speak. Like, this is the subject, but you're out there to the public eye, and there's going to be a time where you're going to miss these hidden years, and you're going to wish sometimes probably that you could have those back. So if you're in a season of these hidden years, man, embrace it, make the most of it, enjoy this uninterrupted time, just soaking in God's presence and just knowing Him and loving Him and letting Him love you, without any kind of like care or worry or anything that goes on with somebody that's in the public eye. And honestly, I think one of the other biggest things, just retouching on the family thing, if whoever may be listening to this, if you're in a position kind of like I am, where you're still pretty new as a husband and a father, you're a young family, and you have this desire for something like public ministry, or just anything that you have a desire to step into or to obtain that you believe God's promised to you. um, Man, just realize that you're in a place that is not by mistake. That it's a very intentional moment that you're in, and God has you in this place very intentionally to teach you and to show you and to shape you really into ultimately who He's called you to be. And like I said before, there's nothing or nobody that's going to help shape you into the image of Christ, like a spouse and a child would. So make the most of it, and do not, oh my gosh, do not allow anything outside of your family to completely strip you away from your family, to distract you from loving your spouse and raising and discipling, raising your kids in the ways of the Lord. Let that be your number one priority if you have a family, and let God take care of the rest. Like, just let Him deal with all of the desires of your heart and the things that you really believe that He's called you to do or to obtain. Um, just leave that up to Him. He's wanting us to trust Him, So, yeah, if you have a family, count your blessings right now, and just be present. Really be present, because there is going to be a time where your kids are grown And you're going to wish that you had a lot of those moments back. That's something I keep trying to be mindful of as I have a 5 and a 2 year old right now. That there's this thing that my wife keeps reminding me of every now and then when the kids are screaming in the back seat just for absolutely nothing, or when they're going crazy in the house and throwing toys all over the place, or food is going up against the wall or whatever. My wife just keeps telling me this thing: one day we're going to be 80. Think about when you're 80. You're going to miss these moments. You are. So, man, make the most of where you're at right now with your family.
Man, that's brilliant. That's gold. Yeah, dude, I would say the last verse of Luke chapter 1 says something to the effect of John the Baptist was in the wilderness, growing in the Lord until the time of his public appearance.
Mm.
And I'd say just meditate on that verse for years and
Yeah.
years and years, and
Yeah.
learn to love the wilderness. And I would say this: you are not ready.
Mm.
You are not ready for any type of public appearance until you no longer desire it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Oh,
think
absolutely.
I think like one of the most valuable places that the Lord has brought me is to be so in love with the hiddenness, the like more of a like just contentment and just wherever He's put you, where life is quiet and peaceful and just stewarding what He's put in front of you, at like concerned with nothing more, right? And
Yeah.
it's just like until you come to the place where you like pray to God that He doesn't invite you on opportunities. Like, just please, Lord, do not let what I'm doing blow up. Do
Yeah.
not let what I'm doing, like, what you've, like, just let this stay small and intimate and, a quiet, like, lead a quiet life, right? Until
Yeah.
you, like, fall more in love with like, the wilderness than the public appearance, you're not ready for the public appearance. And
Mm-hmm.
so, just be honest with yourself, because you're not hurting anyone but yourself trying to fake it. Because that's the thing, man, is we knew the right things to say. Like
Oh,
you would never say, like, we have the language, right? It's
yep.
like we know we're supposed to say, no, I don't, I'm good with the wilderness, like I just want, but the desire, be real with your own desires. That's all I ask. You don't have to tell anyone else what the real you is, your desires, if you don't want to be transparent and vulnerable. I think
Yeah.
that's good though if you choose to do that, but at least be real with yourself. I
Yeah.
think that's the biggest thing that I can encourage. Just be real with yourself. Stop with the language, right? Stop with knowing all the right things to say, right? Let those right things infiltrate your heart and let them become the reality of your heart. Because I would say 9 times out of 10, what we say is just the right thing to say to justify the wrong that's in our heart. And so, yeah, fall in love with the wilderness for sure, and get more zealous about getting a PhD and how to effectively make and measure discipleship than build a church or a
Yes.
ministry of any sort. Like, who cares about the 501c3? Who cares about the bank account? Who cares about the nonprofit status? Who cares about any of that? Systems, organization. I realize they have their place and they help. And they're not inherently bad, but if they become your pursuit and you become a doctor in how to build church and organizations and revitalize church culture and all this stuff, and you have no idea how to make a disciple or even measure the maturity of disciples, you failed. You've missed it in terms of like if you're being a minister, right?
Yeah.
So I would say revitalize your priority and attention to that. Don't worry about numbers. Who cares? If you're worried about numbers, figure out how to measure the number of like a number, put a number to the fruit of the people
Mm-hmm.
that the Lord's given you to shepherd. Because if they're not producing fruit, it doesn't matter how many people are in your seats or
Yep.
hear the sound of your voice. Like, a million people could hear the sound of your voice, hear your teachings, hear your singing, and all this, but if they walk away and they don't produce any fruit in their life, your ministry was useless. That's just how I feel about that. So sorry, I'm being so blunt and vain, but here, this is just where I'm at. Um,
Love.
and and yeah, man, prioritize the one thing. The one thing. Seek, like, desire nothing else. Don't desire a job. Don't, like, as hard, like, as weird as it is to hear and say, don't even desire an income. Like, don't desire anything but to fear the Lord.
Yeah.
Until you fear the Lord and you desire to be in His presence and a place of prayer and a place of studying His Word and letting Him speak to you, until that becomes the thing you are most consumed and preoccupied with, I would say that you still have areas to grow, in the sense of what we read in Ecclesiastes 12 earlier, where it's like, this is the whole duty of man, is to fear God and keep His commands. I
Mm.
would say make that your top priority. Fear God, right? Get in his presence and let him do the heart transplant. Let him do everything else and produce fruit from your life. Continually pray the prayer, God, I want to be the good soil. I'm going to be the good soil that produces 30, 60, 100 fold. Like let's start getting real and vulnerable about the condition of our heart and stop playing good Christian on the outside, because we have made a generation of really good looking Pharisees, if I'm being honest, and I was one of them for the longest time, and I was the best of it. I feel like in some ways I could say what Paul said is like, among Pharisees and among all of these people, I was elite, man. I was the best Pharisee that there was, right? And I was just, and I'm just, I wage war against that mindset. I wage war against that philosophy today. It is so vital that we get these priorities in line. And we could sit here for another hour and just talk about the different values and priorities that we think are important for the next generation of leaders. But we won't. Maybe we'll do that later, because we've already gone like an hour and a half. So we're going to land the plane here.
Sure.
And hopefully people will make it this far in the episode, because this is really good information that I wish I had been taught and encouraged with when I was coming up, or last 10 years, 12 years. So, Cody, thanks so much. This has been awesome, man. It's been a really good
Thanks for
time.
having.
Yeah, absolutely. Very great information. Let's just land the plane here in prayer, and yeah, and then we'll see what the future holds. I'd love to have another conversation at some time, because I think there's just so much to unpack. Um,
Yeah.
but if you would, go ahead, and would you mind closing us in prayer?
Oh, absolutely. Father, thank you so much for this moment. Um, I thank you for who you are. I thank you that you are faithful to to teach us your ways, to show us your heart so that we can put that on display through our lives. I thank you that you're faithful to continue to shape us to look like you, Jesus. Father, you're so good to us. You're unfailing. You're unshaken. You are our constant, God. There's nobody in our lives that we can lean on in ways that we can lean on like you. You're our rock. I thank you for everything that you've brought Lee and I both through, and anybody else that may be listening to this. I thank you for the things that we've been through, because it's helped shape us into who we are today. I thank you so much for that. And I thank you for the things that we've learned, and being faithful to teach us the things that you want us to learn. So Father, I pray for the ones that are in the positions that we are in, the hidden years, so to speak. I pray for the ones, the generation behind us that are in a position that we were in when we were teenagers and when we were in our early 20s, and zealous and just wanting to do anything and everything for the Lord. I pray for a very significant yielding. I pray that generations that are coming, God, that they would also be ones to say, I will not go anywhere without your presence. If your presence is not with me, I will not go. I pray for such a hunger for your presence. I pray for such an enjoyment, honestly, for intimacy with you. Pray that we would just simply know you a little more each day, and that we will be known by you. You spelled it out for us, and you showed us in your word that we can come to you and say, we have done all of these things in your name. And you could possibly tell us, you get away from me because I never knew you. Because of the fact that we are so obsessed with doing things and using gifts and talents that we have put actually getting to know you and sit with you on the back burner. May we know you and be known by you. May intimacy with you and practicing your presence be above anything else in our lives and what we're after. Continue to rearrange priorities that need to be arranged. Father, give us the grace and the strength that we need to take up our cross daily and die to ourselves so that we can see and know what it is, what it looks like, and what it is like to truly live. Jesus, we love you. We praise you. We thank you for who you are. We pray this in your name.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Cody, for hanging out with us for a couple hours. It's been awesome. It's good to have you, man.
Good to be here, bro. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. That has been our talk with Cody and I. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful time. There was so much amazing stuff there that we've been able to kind of explore through, and Cody's story and testimony is so powerful, and it pulls out so much. I hope that you've been edified by it. I hope that you'll share it with someone that you think would be edified by it. And if you haven't already joined our community, Emmaus Online, I'd love to invite you to be a part of that. You can see the link in the description. Come on in. We're building a community of people who are just hungry to become biblically literate and wholly healthy followers of Jesus. So we hope to see you in there. Until next time, God bless you guys.